Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So we both want to say we're so happy to come back to Scripts. We were here last year. So really quick, I know we got 30 minutes and we got a lot of material to tell you. So one is when, just looking at these questions, these are our overview. So we're going to be talking about just basic human trafficking, the victims, trafficking, and then we're going to get to a personal story as well. So here's our questions. When you think of human trafficking, what do you think of? So if you wanted to put it in the little chat box. Also, we want to know who's out there. Any attorneys or any advocates, therapists. So who's all out there?
I'm seeing in the chat music therapists, LGBTQ teens, psychologists, current law student, housing coordinator, and DV transitional shelter, family services, psychologist, CPA, criminal defense investigator, retired therapist. Wow, you guys, that's awesome. Child welfare therapist, victim advocate, good girl, or guy. Peer advocate for 18 to 25, awesome. Psychologist, teacher. Hey, homie. Oh, hi, Karina.
Yeah, I know, I saw Karina on there too.
Yeah, victim advocate. We love you guys. Thank you for all your hard work. And volunteer. I know there are. There's many of us.
Yeah, there is.
And somebody's funny and old fart.
Hey, everybody needs to learn about this.
All right.
So we're
all right.
Thank
you for your participation, you guys. We really appreciate that. Yeah. We like this to be a participating audience. So I'll let you go ahead, Diane.
Yeah. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty. So what is human trafficking? So some of this you might not realize is part of human trafficking. So there's sex trafficking, which that's what we're going to get into today. There's also labor trafficking, domestic servitude, forced marriages, child soldiers, organ harvesting, forced marriages.
And the difference between human trafficking and exploitation.
Yes, there is. And we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah.
So one of the big things, a lot of people think human trafficking, they think that it's the person that's crossing the border, but that's smuggling. That is totally different. So smuggling is where it's against borders. They're crossing a border. Now, with human trafficking, sometimes you cross the border and sometimes you don't. And the only illegal part of smuggling is they're just coming into a different country. And then a lot of times you can get away, it can go into trafficking. Like if they cross the border and then they hold them over and they won't let them go until they perform for them. That's when it becomes human trafficking. The other big thing we really want you to remember with human trafficking is that force, fraud, and coercion. That's a big thing. And we're going to get in more detail about that too. So let's
go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say force, fraud, and coercion is how they get these girls to do these things. So yeah, we'll get into that more.
Yes, we will. So one of the big things, who's at risk? Basically, anybody's at risk. A lot of our youth and runaways, transgender, LGBTQ, it could be anybody. It could be boys, young men, girls, women, and they can come from all places. So basically, it's anybody, but there is a high number
vulnerabilities.
Vulnerability, yes.
Vulnerabilities. People with high vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So that would be our foster care youth, our transgender, LGBT, are high risk to be trafficked.
Yeah, single moms, somebody going through crisis, things like that, that perpetrators spot, and they know when a girl is vulnerable, and they know when to, go in for it, and they're good at it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
they're very good at it.
they're good at sniffing out the vulnerability.
Yeah. So here's some of the risk factors. Like we just said, it can come from poverty. They can come from, have families of substance abuse, mental illness. A lot is connected to child abuse, child sexual abuse, lack of support, like we just said, so it can come from divorced families. It can come
Hmm.
from if there's mental learning disabilities, all of
Blended families.
blended
There are
families.
people that don't believe them when they say so. I have a comment right here. It says in Canada, a lot of girls willingly turn out because they think it's glamorous. That is that's how it goes pretty much everywhere. And I was trafficked in Canada. I'll get a little bit into that later, but yeah, that is, I just wanted to touch on that, because that is kind of how they're not self-identified, and they do think that it's glamorous when they're in the life.
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
sometimes the trafficker puts in that glamour too. Oh, it's
Right. Yeah.
glamorous. You could do this, and then you could go into
Part of
acting, and
part of the grooming process.
yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we identify the victims? And this is just some, but especially our group home kids, we definitely need to keep an eye out if they have two phones. Um, and let me put out this, just because there's some of this on there and you're like, ooh, I know somebody that has two phones, doesn't necessarily mean they're being trafficked. So we want to make that clear. But it puts that red flag up, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they've had trauma, physical trauma, sexual abuse in their past, truancy, especially on Mondays and Fridays, because what happens is a lot of times some of these traffickers get the girls and they go out on weekends. They go to Vegas for the weekend, and then they don't come home until late night Sunday, and so they can't get up for school. And some of our survivors are at home still. They're going to school. They're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So it could literally be anybody.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key too is if they're making reference to some of the language that we're going to get into later. If they have a significant older boyfriend is another one.
And Diana, I'm looking at the chat. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure that you know this. People are wondering also, how does this connect to boys? And I know that you know that, but I just want to put it out there so that people can understand you're presenting both sides of the coin.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All of these are for boys too. So, so if they have an older girlfriend or they met them online, I had a client that met they thought it was a girl online, and it turned out to be a man, but they presented himself online during World of Warcraft and asked for pictures. And then when they got those pictures, he used that to manipulate them to perform for him. So there's many ways that this can happen, especially like your chronic runaways. We do see a lot of boys being trafficked that way, and a lot of survivor. So they're just doing it just to survive, to eat, to have a place to live. So all of these are the same for boys as well. The problem with the boys,
and there's two sides of the spectrum with the boys. The spectrum of should we get into that with the pimp subculture? Well, the pimp subculture, the hip hop, the rap, the glamorizing of pimping, if you will, and there's actually a system to this, and they give out awards once a year. They have a pimp convention, and give out a trophy, and that's one side of the spectrum that we have to protect our boys from. And then the other side is victimization and becoming a victim of that. And, nobody believing them. And boys are harder to self-identify because it's harder for them to admit that it happened than girls, and less of them speak out about it. So, yeah, that's what I kind of would put in there. But yeah, the information can go either way for either sex or gender. I don't know if that helps at all.
Also, some of the part to get them to is what we call seasoning. They're breaking them down. I know this says girls, but it also goes for boys. Boys usually are, like I said, they get manipulated with those pictures. They're going to go out, they're going to send all these pictures to their family and friends. So they use manipulation in both genders. Now, sometimes with girls, there is more of that physical abuse by their pimp, whereas boys, not necessarily, but both of them are being manipulated. And that's all part of that grooming aspect. So
yes.
Here's what we're talking about grooming. And this goes for boys and girls. So beaten, slapped, whipped, sexual assault. A lot of times the trafficker will will rape their victim or survivor. Torture, they're going to hurt their family, they're going to hurt their friends, their brothers or sisters, all of this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, they'll rename them, give them a different name. There's a lot of emotional abuse going on. And a lot of this...
And renaming strips you of your identity. They do a lot of, in coercion and grooming, they do a lot of stripping you of your identity and filling it back up with what they want you to believe. So
yeah, kind of breaking
you down. To add that in.
Yeah, that's that breaking you down aspect.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And a lot of these survivors are just wanting, like what we all want. We want a family, we want that love. And so, like we said, they manipulate the kids, boys, women, all of it. They manipulate, and then they bring them in, and some of them will do that like that. As we get into the naming, the language, they try to rebuild that family aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people will ask, why don't they escape? Why don't they just leave? Why don't they just go to the police? Like as we said earlier, some of them don't even realize that they're in a human trafficking, sex trafficking type of scenario.
Yeah, they're not educated on what exactly that means, and they don't self-identify as a victim. And I just wanted to touch on a comment here for Michael. Oh, I just lost it. He was saying boys are just as much sexually abused, and yes, we agree with that. What I was saying is, it's easier for girls to go get help, or she'll end up, in a situation where, the first responders show up and she has to go get a rape kit done or whatever. It's harder for the boys to come out and say, this happened to me. So it's not like it's not happening. It's just that the boys don't come out with it as easily as the girls do. So I think hopefully that clears that up.
And a lot of times when what we found, there's been studies done why boys don't report, is because with the police, they don't even want to bring up the subject. They don't, because they're looking at it as either a gay or
they're embarrassed.
Yeah, and so they don't even want to bring it up. They'd rather just ignore it. Now, not all officers do this, but as everybody's getting trained, they start looking more for these type of things. And a lot of times, like we said, they don't realize that they're being trafficked. And
exactly.
And so they just think they're doing it for survival. You know, I'm just doing it to get food. I'm just doing it for some money, and don't realize they're being exploited or being trafficked.
Yeah, and like Karina says, for boys, I think it's harder for them to reach out for help, and it is, because it, you know, guys, it hurts their ego, and it's more difficult.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely, Karina. That's all right.
So now we're getting on to our traffickers.
Okay.
As I look at our time. So who's our traffickers? Now we're showing this this hat with the P. As we were talking about, you know, how the pimping is a really good, you know, it's looked at as really popular. I'm going to pimp my car. I'm going to pimp my phone. I'm going to pimp this. And so it's looked in a glamorous light. But if you do see a P on a shirt or a hat, tattoos, they might be a trafficker. And traffickers can be all ages. They can be male, female, young, old. Let's look at these. These are some traffickers. You know, an 80-year-old man was just convicted of trafficking. And it's amazing that, and he was in Ohio, just trafficked. You know, our husband and wife team, Epstein, right? Even as young as kids are trafficking other kids. And we had that in one of the school districts that I worked for, where some of our older kids and our boys were trafficking our young girls. And they didn't even realize it because they didn't see who was getting paid on the side. And so it could be actually anybody, families, and we're going to get into that right now. So let's look at our traffickers.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. A gorilla pimp is more like a, I was reading the comments, somebody was already talking about that, is more like a force or overpower, you know, that's the, you know, the kidnapping one. They throw them in the van, they're forced, they're kidnapped kind of thing. You know, the Romeo pimp uses charm and gifts, and hey, you know, maybe starts out with you know, let's do some webcam stuff or something like that, and it continues to go until they're definitely being exploited, but from exploitation into just straight trafficking. And the CEO pimps is photographers, strip club owners. I've had a few of those, and they kind of prey on your you know, your aspiration to model, or, you know, money. They use money and flashy and glamour and, you know, things of that nature. And the only one that's not on here is familial trafficking, but I'm going to start with that with my story. So are we going to a next slide, or am I staying here for right now?
Let's see.
We're running a little short on time. We only have a couple minutes, and so depending on how long your story is, if you want to do it now and then move everybody to Q&A.
No problem. I'll do a quick one. Okay. So my name is Kristen, and I am a survivor advocate. And when I was 15, I ran away from home to go find my biological mother, who was in Canada. And she was a dancer and a call girl, and her and my aunt turned me out. So that's familial trafficking, and I think it's a pretty low number, statistic wise, of how many you know, where a family member turns a girl out to do her first trick. Or now I'm using trafficking lingo, so, and we didn't go over that, but you know, I moved then to Detroit, where I experienced more of a gorilla pimp situation, where I was sold from a guy to his drug dealer, and it kind of just went on again, you know, to another drug dealer, to another, and I was kind of passed around. I did a little tour in Detroit, And then when I got back to that guy's house, and mind you, like she said in the beginning, when I was at the guy's house that was first trafficking me, before he sent me out on this tour, I was still in high school, and I was keeping myself in high school while this was happening to me. So, you know, it can happen. They can be at school, they can be, you can see them like having a normal life, or you can see them in a dirty motel and they look underage. It doesn't matter either way, especially with the internet nowadays. The perpetrators can come right into the living room. You know, with the CEO pimps, I experienced that after I was in the life for 10 years from the time that my mom turned me out, and then I had another pimp in Vegas where you know, he forced me to dance, and I started doing that. And I spent 10 years in the life, and then I spent the next 10 years help building a coalition. You know, they used my survivor experience to, how can we help these girls? And I was able to do that and run some groups in juvenile hall for underage girls before the law passed in January of 2017 that minors could not be arrested for prostitution anymore. I was able to go in and do groups with them, the minors that were in jail for prostitution. So after that I consulted and worked for many nonprofits, specifically for domestic violence and human trafficking, and then I got state certified. And we can be first responder. Yeah, that's how we met. And so, you know, we're apt and equipped to present and teach, and I mentor. I ended up writing my whole curriculum. I've been out for 10 years, and I kind of backtracked my healing process and wrote my curriculum up and my story up, and I ran a test group with it, and it went really well. So I didn't want to take up too much time. How am I doing there?
Well,
on
I think we're out of time, but
okay. I didn't know if I was going to go into gaslighting or not, but
well, we have the Q&A,
that's why I asked.
So
okay.
We do have the Q&A, right, Scott? If you want to hear more about our story, or if you have more questions for us, we can get in more detail, because we do have a lot of material.
Yeah, I had a forced marriage and all that too.
So if you would please, anybody that would like to go in the Q&A room and continue the conversation, if you see that little green yes checkbox,